I've always been drawn to the eerie charm of abandoned places. There's something about the silent halls and peeling wallpaper that tells stories of a time long past. So when my friend Tyler suggested we explore the old Ravenswood Asylum before it was demolished, I couldn't resist. Ravenswood had been closed for decades, standing on the outskirts of town like a forgotten sentinel. Rumors swirled about the place, whispers of unethical experiments and restless spirits. Most people avoided it, but for us it was the perfect adventure. We planned our excursion for a crisp autumn afternoon. The leaves crunched under our feet as we made our way through the overgrown path leading to the asylum's entrance. The building loomed ahead, its once grand facade, and Tyler pointed out that the front doors were chained shut, suggesting we look for another way in. Circling the perimeter, we found a broken window leading into the basement. He boosted me up, and I carefully climbed through, landing on a cold, damp floor. He followed shortly after. The basement was cluttered with old equipment and boxes covered in dust. The air was thick with the smell of mildew. Using our flashlights, we navigated through the maze of forgotten relics until we found a staircase leading. Emerging into the main hallway, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The corridor stretched out before us, lined with doors on either side. Faded numbers were stenciled above each one. Tyler suggested we start with the patient rooms. We entered the first room on the left. The bed frame was rusted, and the mattress had long since deteriorated. On the wall, someone had scratched symbols that I didn't recognize. I commented on the unsettling nature of the Tylerings. He agreed, noting that it added to the creepiness of the place. We moved from room to room, each one similar yet uniquely haunting. In one, we found old medical charts scattered on the floor. Picking one up, I tried to read the faded handwriting but could only make out a few words. Something about experimental treatments. Tyler mentioned that he'd heard stories about the head doctor conducting controversial procedures. I told him that we should be careful, as we didn't know what we might stumble upon. As we continued exploring, we reached what appeared to be the common area. Chairs were overturned, and the remnants of a piano stood in the corner. I imagined the patients gathering here, trying to find moments of peace. A sudden noise startled us, a faint tapping sound echoing down the hallway. I asked if he had heard it. He nodded, suggesting it was probably just an animal. We decided to check it out, following the sound deeper into the asylum. The tapping grew louder, more rhythmic. It led us to a set of double doors Tyler's surgical wing. I hesitated, saying that maybe we shouldn't go any further. Tyler dismissed my concerns, insisting that we had come this far. Pushing open the doors, we entered a large room filled with outdated medical equipment. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered on metal trays. In the center stood an operating table, the leather straps still intact. A shiver ran down my spine. I retired that the place felt wrong. He admitted that it was unsettling but also fascinating. The tapping sound had stopped. An uneasy silence enveloped us. Suddenly we heard a whisper. It was faint, almost indiscernible. I asked if he had said something. He shook his head, his expression turning serious. We both stood still, listening intently. The whisper came again, slightly louder. It sounded like it was coming from the floor above us. Against my better judgment, I suggested we leave. Tyler, however, was intrigued and wanted to investigate. Reluctantly, I followed him to the staircase leading upward. Each step creaked under our weight. The second floor was darker, the windows boarded up. We entered a room that appeared to be an office. Papers were strewn across the desk, and books lined the shelves. One book lay open, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, reading aloud the title. Psychiatric Treatments and Ethical Boundaries. He commented that ethics probably weren't a priority here. As we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us. I jumped, my heart racing. I accused him of playing a prank. He raised his hands defensively, swearing it wasn't him. We tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in. I suggested we try the window. He pointed out that it was boarded up tightly. The whispering returned, clearer now. It seemed to be all around us. I strained to make out the words but couldn't understand. Tyler said we needed to stay calm and think logically. I agreed, though fear was creeping in. Suddenly the room grew colder. Our breath became visible in the icy air. I noticed a figure in the corner, a shadowy silhouette that hadn't been there before. I nudged him, pointing toward the corner. He froze, his eyes widening. The figure moved slowly toward us, though its features remained indistinct. I whispered that we needed to get out of there immediately. He nodded, and together we threw our weight against the door. After several tries, it burst open and we stumbled into the hallway. Without looking back, we ran toward the staircase. As we descended, footsteps echoed behind us, heavy and deliberate. Reaching the main floor, we headed for the basement entrance. I shouted that we were almost there. He urged me to keep going. We clambered through the window, scraping our arms in the process. Once outside, we didn't stop running until we reached the car. Gasping for breath, I asked what had just happened. He shook his head, unable to speak. We sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to process the experience. Eventually, he broke the silence, admitting that maybe exploring the asylum hadn't been the best idea. I agreed, suggesting that some places are better left undisturbed. On the drive back, we decided not to tell anyone about what we saw. It felt too surreal, and we doubted anyone would believe us. That night I couldn't sleep. Images of the shadowy figure and the eerie whispers replayed in my mind. A few days later, I read in the local newspaper that the Ravenswood Asylum had been demolished ahead of schedule. The article mentioned that during the demolition, workers found a hidden room in the basement containing personal effects of former patients. I couldn't help but wonder if we had stirred something awake during our visit. Tyler called me saying he had been having nightmares. I confessed that I had as well. We agreed that we might need to find a way to put this behind us. Researching ways to find closure, we decided to visit the site one last time. Arriving at the now empty lot, we stood where the asylum once loomed. I suggested we say a few words, perhaps an apology for intruding. He agreed, and together we spoke softly, expressing regret and a hope that whatever lingered could find peace. As we turned to leave, a gentle breeze rustled through the grass. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. He retired that he felt calmer. Since that day, the nightmare ceased. Though the memory remains, it no longer haunts me. I've learned to respect the boundaries of places steeped in history and pain. Sometimes curiosity can lead us down paths better left unexplored. If you ever feel the allure of an abandoned place calling to you, remember our story. Some doors, once opened, cannot be easily closed. I've always been drawn to the melancholic charm of abandoned places. There's a certain beauty in decay, a story waiting to be uncovered beneath layers of dust and neglect. So when I heard about the old carnival grounds on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to see it for myself. The carnival had been a thriving attraction decades ago, a place where laughter and music filled the air. But after a series of unfortunate accidents, it closed abruptly, leaving everything behind as if frozen in time. Rumors swirled about why it was never dismantled. A curse, some said, or perhaps something even darker. My friend Jessica was hesitant when I suggested we explore it. She reminded me of the stories we'd heard, the whispers of strange occurrences. But her curiosity eventually got the better of her, and we set out on a crisp autumn morning, armed with cameras and a sense of adventure. We arrived at the entrance, where a rusted gate stood ajar. Faded banners hung limply, and the once bright colors were now muted by time. The path ahead was overgrown with weeds, and the air carried a faint scent of nostalgia mixed with decay. I suggested we start with the Ferris wheel, its skeletal frame looming against the gray sky. Jessica agreed, noting that it was the most iconic structure. As we walked, the silence was almost palpable. No birds sang, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. We passed by dilapidated game stalls, their prizes still hanging, though moth-eaten and discolored. I commented on how eerie it was that everything remained untouched. She nodded, saying it was as if the people had vanished into thin air. Reaching the Ferris wheel, we stood beneath its towering structure. The seats swayed gently, creaking with each movement. I took a few photos, capturing the haunting beauty of the scene. Jessica pointed out the carousel nearby, its ornate horses frozen mid-gallop. We decided to take a closer look. The carousel was remarkably well preserved. The paint, though faded, still showed glimpses of vibrant hues. Mirrors surrounded the center column, some cracked, reflecting distorted images. I ran my hand over one of the horses, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. She suggested we try to turn it on, half joking. I laughed, but then noticed a control panel beside the ride. I remarked that it wouldn't hurt to check. Surprisingly, when I flipped a switch, the carousel hummed to life. Lights flickered, and a tinny melody began to play, warped by years of neglect. Jessica looked at me with wide eyes, asking how that was possible. I admitted I had no idea, but it was both thrilling and unsettling. We watched as the carousel rotated slowly, the horses moving up and down in a ghostly dance. The music echoed through the empty grounds, amplifying the eerie atmosphere. Suddenly we heard laughter. Children's laughter, faint but unmistakable. I turned to Jessica, asking if she heard it too. She nodded, her expression turning serious. We scanned the area but saw no one. I suggested that perhaps the sound was carrying from a nearby park. She reminded me that there were no parks nearby. Feeling a chill, I decided to turn off the carousel, but when I pressed the switch, nothing happened. The ride continued its slow rotation, the music growing louder. Jessica urged me to try again. I flipped the switch repeatedly, but it was unresponsive. She suggested we leave, and I agreed. As we walked away, the laughter intensified, and we could hear whispers, words we couldn't quite make out. I told her to keep moving, trying to stay calm. We headed toward the funhouse, thinking it might lead us back to the entrance more quickly. Entering the funhouse, we were met with warped mirrors lining the walls. Our reflections stretched and twisted, creating unsettling images. Jessica said she didn't like this place. I admitted I felt the same, but urged her to keep going. We navigated the maze-like corridors, the path illuminated by sporadic flickers of light from malfunctioning bulbs. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure dart past, a small child laughing as they disappeared around a corner. I stopped, asking if she saw the child. She shook her head, eyes wide with fear. We quickened our pace, searching for an exit. The corridor seemed endless, each turn leading us deeper into the labyrinth. I pulled out my phone to use the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The screen remained black, despite being fully charged earlier. Jessica tried hers, but it was the same. Panic set in as the whispers grew louder, surrounding us. The laughter now sounded distorted, almost sinister. I grabbed her hand, insisting we needed to find a way out immediately. She agreed, her voice trembling. We stumbled upon a door marked exit and pushed it open, only to find ourselves back at the carousel. It was still turning, the music blaring. I exclaimed that this was impossible. She suggested we might be going in circles. Desperate, we decided to head toward the Ferris wheel again, hoping to retrace our steps. As we moved, fog began to roll in, obscuring our view. The air grew colder, and the scent of cotton candy mingled with the dampness. A scent that shouldn't have existed here anymore. Jessica shivered, saying she felt like we were being watched. I felt it too, an oppressive presence weighing down on us. Through the fog, we saw silhouettes, figures standing motionless watching us. I whispered that we needed to stay calm. She asked what they were. I had no answer. The figures began to move slowly toward us, their shapes becoming clearer. They appeared as carnival performers. A clown with a distorted grin, a ringmaster tipping his hat, acrobats balancing impossibly in the air. I told her to run. We sprinted toward what we hoped was the exit, the fog thickening around us. The sounds of the carnival grew louder. The music, the laughter, the chatter of a crowd. But there was no crowd, only us and the shadows pursuing. Jessica tripped, falling to the ground. I helped her up, urging her to keep going. We finally reached the entrance gate, but it was now closed and locked, chains wrapping tightly around it. I searched frantically for another way out. She pointed to a gap in the fence nearby. We squeezed through just as the figures reached the gate, their expressions unreadable. Once on the other side, the fog lifted, and the sounds ceased abruptly. The carnival stood silent and still once more. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Breathing heavily, I asked if she was okay. She nodded, tears in her eyes. We sat in silence for a moment, trying to process what had happened. I suggested that perhaps the stories about the carnival were true. She agreed, saying we should never have disturbed it. On the drive back, we made a pact not to speak of the incident to anyone. It felt too surreal, and we doubted anyone would believe us. In the weeks that followed, we both experienced vivid nightmares. Dreams of being trapped in the carnival, unable to escape the grasp of its ghostly inhabitants. Eventually, we sought help from a local historian, hoping to find answers. He revealed that the carnival had closed after a tragic fire broke out during a performance, claiming the lives of many visitors and staff. Since then, there had been reports of strange happenings, though few dared to venture there. Realizing we had encountered the restless spirits of that ill-fated day, we felt a profound sadness. We decided to hold a small memorial at the site, leaving flowers and offering our apologies. After that, the nightmare subsided and a sense of peace settled over us. I've learned that some places carry the weight of past tragedies, and it's important to respect them. I've always been fascinated by the hidden corners of the city, those places that time seems to have forgotten. So when I heard about an abandoned subway station beneath the old downtown district, I couldn't resist the urge to explore it. My friend Randy was hesitant when I suggested we check it out. He reminded me that trespassing in the subway tunnels was illegal and dangerous, but after some convincing he agreed to join me. We planned our excursion for a quiet Sunday evening when the streets above would be less crowded. We entered the subway system like any regular passengers, but instead of boarding a train, we slipped past a maintenance door I'd discovered on a previous scouting trip. The door led to a narrow stairwell that descended deeper underground. The air grew colder as we made our way down, the hum of the active subway lines fading into silence. At the bottom of the stairs, we found ourselves in a dimly lit corridor. The walls were lined with old advertisements from decades past, their colors faded and edges peeling. Randy commented on how eerie it felt, like stepping back in time. I agreed, feeling a mix of excitement and unease. We continued down the corridor until we reached a rusted gate blocking the entrance to the abandoned station. With some effort, we managed to squeeze through a gap where the metal had corroded. The station itself was vast and cavernous. Dust-covered benches lined the platform, and the tracks were overgrown with weeds that had somehow taken root in the darkness. Old signs hung crookedly, their letters barely legible. The name of the station was obscured by grime. Randy suggested we take some photos to document our adventure. I pulled out my camera, snapping shots of the hauntingly beautiful decay. As we explored, I noticed that the station seemed unnaturally silent. There was no distant rumble of trains, no dripping water or scurrying rodents, just an oppressive quiet that pressed in on us. Randy remarked that it was strange how soundless it was. I nodded, feeling a slight chill. We decided to walk along the platform toward the far end of the station. As we moved, I thought I heard a faint whisper. I stopped and looked around but saw nothing. Randy asked if everything was okay. I told him I thought I heard something. He suggested it was just our imaginations playing tricks in the silence. We continued on, but the whispering grew more distinct. It sounded like distant voices too faint to understand. I mentioned it to Randy again. He admitted that he heard it too now. We stood still, listening intently. The whispers seemed to be coming from one of the dark tunnels branching off from the station. Curiosity getting the better of us, we decided to investigate. We entered the tunnel cautiously, our flashlights piercing the darkness. The walls were marked with graffiti, some of it recent, but much of it old and faded. As we walked deeper, the whispers grew louder, yet remained unintelligible. The tunnel curved slightly, and soon the entrance to the station was out of sight. Randy suggested we turn back. I hesitated, but agreed that perhaps we'd gone far enough. Just as we turned to leave, we heard a distinct sound, a distant echo of footsteps approaching from deeper within the tunnel. We exchanged uneasy glances. I whispered that maybe we weren't alone. He agreed, suggesting we should hurry back. We began to retrace our steps when suddenly the beam of my flashlight flickered and went out. I tapped it, but it wouldn't turn back on. Randy's light remained steady, so he illuminated the path for us. We moved quickly, the whispers now replaced by a low murmur that seemed to surround us. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared ahead, blocking our way back to the station. It was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Randy called out, asking who was there. There was no response. The figure remained motionless for a moment before slowly stepping toward us. Panic surged through me. I grabbed Randy's arm, urging him to run deeper into the tunnel. He hesitated but followed my lead. We sprinted down the tunnel, the sound of our footsteps echoing loudly. Behind us, the murmur had grown into a cacophony of voices, all overlapping and indistinct. We came upon a side passage we hadn't noticed before and ducked into it. The passage was narrower and led to a set of metal stairs ascending upward. Without any other options, we climbed the stairs, hoping to find an exit. At the top, we emerged into a small circular chamber. In the center stood an old control panel covered in dust and cobwebs. Randy remarked that this must have been some kind of maintenance room. I agreed, scanning the walls for another way out. There was a heavy door on the far side of the room. We approached it and found it unlocked. Pushing it open, we entered a hallway that looked more modern, though still abandoned. As we walked down the hallway, the lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows. Randy suggested that perhaps we were beneath an old building. I hoped that meant we'd find a way back to the surface soon. The whispers had subsided, but the sense of unease remained. We reached another door marked exit and felt a surge of relief. Opening the door, we found ourselves in a large room filled with rows of empty chairs facing a blank screen. It looked like an old lecture hall or briefing room. I wondered aloud why such a room would be underground. Randy didn't have an answer. As we crossed the room, the door we'd entered through slammed shut behind us. We rushed back to it, but it was locked tight. Panic set in once more. Suddenly, the screen flickered to life, displaying grainy black and white footage of the very station we had been exploring. In the footage, two figures resembling us walked along the platform. We watched in horror as shadowy figures emerged from the tunnels surrounding the two explorers. Randy exclaimed that this couldn't be real. I didn't know what to think. The footage continued, showing the shadowy figures engulfing the explorers, who struggled in vain. The screen went dark. We stood in stunned silence. Then, the whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the room from all directions. Desperate to escape, we searched for another exit. In the corner, we found a small door partially hidden behind a curtain. We dashed toward it, flung it open, and stumbled into another hallway. This one was lined with old lockers, some hanging open with personal items still inside. We hurried down the hallway, the whispers following us. At the end, we found a stairwell leading upward. Climbing as fast as we could, we ascended flight after flight, our legs burning with effort. Finally, we reached a metal hatch at the top. Randy pushed against it, and with a groan, it gave way. We emerged into an alleyway behind an old building. The night air was a welcome relief. We collapsed against the wall, catching our breath. I asked if he was okay. He nodded, his face pale. We agreed that we needed to get far away from that place. As we made our way back to the main streets, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Randy suggested that perhaps it was an elaborate prank or some kind of psychological experiment. I wasn't convinced. In the days that followed, we both struggled with nightmares and a lingering sense of dread. One evening, Randy called me, his voice tense. He said he had been researching the abandoned station and discovered that it was closed decades ago after a tragic accident. A train had derailed and many lives were lost. Some said the spirits of the victims still lingered, unable to move on. I listened, feeling a cold knot forming in my stomach. He suggested that perhaps we had encountered those restless spirits. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that we had ventured into a place where we didn't belong. Since then, we've avoided any talk of urban exploration. Some mysteries are better left undisturbed. If you ever feel the allure of forgotten places calling to you, remember our story. Sometimes what lies beneath the surface is meant to stay hidden. There was some